All right, now that we've done with checking out our survey and we're happy with it and we're ready to analyze it, you can click on the k-means cluster, and it'll take a second for this to work. I think I've already clicked this thing, but the idea here is now we can, if you want to reproduce your results, so you wanted to produce something and you wanted other people to run it and be able to get the same results, then what you would do is you'd set a seed in this case, and all that does is it makes sure that any randomness that's involved in creating the clusters when you start doing the k-means, because it's an expectation maximization algorithm, which means it's not necessarily going to give you exactly the same thing every single time, but it'll give you something that's really good. But if you wanted it to give you exactly the same thing, then just click on, set the seed basically. So we set the seed as true, and then it runs and it does this thing, and then we can look at a scree plot. Now, what does a scree plot do? The scree plot is simply just giving you sort of the number of groups that we would like to have. And so, what do I mean by that? So this is distortion is sort of a measure of error. So if you choose to do 3 groups, then this is how much error you're going to have. If you choose to do 4 groups, then you're going to have this much error. Now the problem is you don't want error to go to zero. Why? Well, because we could just make 900. I think there's 900 individual respondents. If we just made k equal 900, then of course you're going to get zero because everyone's like really close to the mean of their data, right? So in other words, like every single cluster is exactly right on the where the mean is located, where the mean of that cluster is located. So that's not necessarily what you want. So I mean, the minimum that you can get by with still having this distortion, this error small, is sort of what you're looking for. And so we're just going to go with 4 right now, but you could experiment with other numbers once you get your data in. And when we do that, once you've decided, then you just click on k-means, and it will pop up and it will give you, so 4 I think is what it starts at, but again, you could either type the number in here by clicking in here, or you could push the plus button. Plus button is probably not recommended, only because in this case it would start computing 5, and then you would want to plus, and then we would start computing 6, and it takes a second for this thing to pop up. But as you can see, this data sort of separated into its 4 clusters according, and this is the principal component analysis. Yeah, but that's PCA1 and PCA2. So what you're trying to do is get the maximum amount of variability in the data, and you're sort of looking at the first 2 principal components. And so you see that this set of data, and there's where its centers at, and that centers here, and so on and so forth. And you can kind of see the color of the ones that are assigned to each one of those clusters. Okay, again, you could experiment with different clusters and sort of see what happens, at least in the 2-dimensional version of this. There, obviously there's a third principal component. There's however many principal components you want to look at, but it gets problematic when you go more than 3. Even at 3, it's a little bit difficult to see, but yeah, I mean, you could do that and see what happens. But we'll just leave it at 4. It's a very the k-means clustering algorithm sort of put people in those particular things, and then you can look at a summary of what those 4 look like. So in this case, you see cluster 0 through 3. So again, so you start off with 0 and you get to 3. So that's obviously 4. And you can see that all of the null values are either in cluster 2 or cluster 3. So again, and this is adding up every single respondent at 169 times, however many. I think there was 28 times 28, and then this was 232 times. I think there was 28 blanks when we looked at it earlier when we were in survey data, and you can see the amount of null values. But that's, again, that's one of the reasons why we were concerned earlier about having null values or not answered questions, because this way of clustering folks would put those null values, because it was so many questions, in groups by themselves. Okay, well, that's k-means clustering, and so those are that's the process that you go through to sort of figure out how many clusters you have. You use the scree plot. You let k-means kind of do its thing, and you can visualize it using the principal components. And then this kind of gives you the summary. And this is the data. I mean, what it is if you wanted to download the data, you could do that, and it would give you the cluster for each one of those individuals. And then, if you just hit the download button by clicking on that button there, and you could get this, and you could use it to do whatever analysis you wanted to. All right, next thing we'll talk about is I'm going to skip the Gaussian mix model because this is basically the same process, and we're going to talk about analyzing clusters. So I'm going to use these clusters here in the next video.